you through the lot, now you know I'm coming through. When the growth look good on you, best believe they wanna screw now. I've been trying to climb, devil threw me in the dark. Baby, don't be insecure, you can still go make a mark like blow. Could never let them drain my soul now. Blow. Table turning like doorknobs, wow. Blow. I think I'm about to set sail. I'm a walking, living legend, walking with my chest out. Life keep dealing me cards, I keep feeling it.
Yes, people. We are back in the building. We are back for match day 2 review as England faced off against the USA. And talk about a drab draw. Talk about a drab draw, man. Like 0-0, no goals. A lot to kind of delve into, to be honest with you, in regards to the game. Against the USA. Guys, make sure you're liking, make sure you're subscribing if you haven't to the content already, and make sure you share this out, as I always say, with your mama, your mama's mama, your mama's mama's mama, and your aunties and your uncles. Guys, let's get into it. So, as I said, obviously we've got a little bit of a different setup for today. I said, now I have to get this out, to be honest with you. Obviously, that game last night, don't really know where to begin. Obviously, I know a lot of us were, after the England win against Iran, was probably looking at that game and was thinking, all right, cool, you know what, England performs pretty decently. 6-2 victory, we saw a lot of positives from that game, and rightly so, to be honest with you. Took a lot of positives from that game. We thought, okay, this is how we're going to see Gareth set up, kind of thing, with the attacking display that we saw, from Saka, from Harry Kane, the midfield kind of dominating. But as soon as, just like the theme of England over the years, as soon as we saw England come up against a somewhat decent team, it just doesn't work. Do you know what I mean? It just doesn't really work, man. Like, we came up against a team whose midfield were able to control us. Tyler Adams, Yunus Musa, and Weston McKennie, they were able to control that game for the USA. And to be honest with you, like most people have said already, if the USA had a proper, striker, that game would have been done and dusted. To be honest with you, that game would have been done and dusted. It's a tricky one, man. Like, look at these three. This is a 3-man midfield that, I don't know if it's just whether that England have that syndrome that when smaller perceived teams come up against them, they just kind of just go into their shell a little bit. Everything we saw against Iran, that was obviously because England were the dominant team. They were overwhelmingly the favourites in that match. In this game, yes, you could probably say they were favourites, obviously coming off the back of a 6-2 win. USA obviously coming off of a 1-1 draw against Wales. So you probably sat there and thought, all right, if they're drawing to Wales, then England can definitely beat them. And again, you would have been right to think that, because I definitely would have thought that as well. My predictions before the game was that England would go out there and win at least 2-1, depending on, who scored first and things like that. But when I'm looking at England and I'm looking at, how the game kind of panned out, there's a lot of things were happening in that game that just didn't really make sense. We'll dive into Gareth Southgate and, substitutions and things like that. But first and foremost, I wanted to concentrate on these three here, because these three here, like I said, they dominated that game. They allowed for USA to take control in the middle of the park. Jude Bellingham came off, he was chasing shadows, the entire game, absolutely just chasing shadows for someone who was so dominant in that first game. To then come up against a decent midfield. This is where you earn your money. This is where you earn that tag, that world-class tag. Now, of course, Jude's only 19, so I'm not pinning anything on Jude and saying, oh, it was his fault and, et cetera, because it wasn't. At the end of the day, it's a team game and there were a lot of faults in that game. But, when Jude and Declan Rice came up against these three, and Mason Mount, should I might add, it was like curtains, to be honest with you. It was honestly curtains. I said in my predictions that I felt if England were going to play with this kind of 4-3-3 or 4-2-3-1, however you kind of want to see it, I guess in possession it's different, and in defensive transitions it's going to be a different kind of setup. But if you're going to come with with that team or with that type of shape, I felt like you needed to play Foden in there because you needed to have someone. Even though we won 6-2 against Iran, we never really had someone who would go beyond, Harry Kane. It was always kind of to the wide areas, to your Sakas, to your Sterlings, kind of thing. And it was only until Gareth had made those substitutions that we started to kind of see, you know, Jack Grealish, obviously, he came onto the field and then, they start giving him the ball a lot more. But then when they're giving him the ball, typical kind of Jack Grealish kind of performance, trying to win fouls and slowing the game down quite a lot. I just felt like that wasn't really, again, this is just my humble opinion. I just felt like that wasn't really what England needed, to be honest with you. Yeah, it just kind of flattered to deceive. Their destiny's in their own hands. I mean, barring Wales coming out and absolutely battering England, England will go through at the bare minimum second, so they won't have to necessarily worry about that. And it is tournament football at the end of the day, so they may be not stressing about it too much, but I just felt like this was a game where you kind of also set your marker down because it is a tough game against the USA side who are a very spirited young team as well. As I said, with Yunus Musa, Tyler Adams, and Weston McKennie. And that's a young, energetic midfield. They were able to bring Aronson off the bench, Leeds player. When he came on again, it's more energy that they are able to bring to their team as opposed to us. We were bringing on, Jordan Henderson, which I know a lot of people didn't really understand, myself included. But look at the touch, the heat maps here. This is Weston McKennie. He was playing on the right of that three-man midfield, kind of predominantly on that right-hand side, almost acting as a right midfielder. But when they were in defensive transitions, he would then come into the center of the park to be able to close down, the gaps through the middle, which would then obviously then leave the wide areas free. But their fullbacks were really good because they were able to pen, Sterling and Saka kind of back. Now, it was only a few times we were able to get in, through Saka and, potentially fashion ourselves a chance. But we weren't really able to kind of dictate that game. If we take a look here, this is Yunus Musa. Again, he's on the left of that three-man midfield. So kind of acting like a left midfielder, but he kind of stayed a bit more central than anything, quite close to Tyler Adams. And he was able to kind of, again, close that gap down. But then he's also good to, when they're on the attack, he can almost act like another winger, which then causes its own problems. And, he was playing alongside Timothy Weah, who was, somewhat decent in that game, wasn't too effective, but at the same time, it's like they were just there to frustrate, but they were so dangerous on that counter attack, and you just couldn't switch off for a second. If we look at Tyler Adams, he was there we go. If you look at Tyler Adams, he was pretty decent, if I'm being honest with you. Controlling that midfield central area, protecting that back forward, not allowing players like Harry Kane to get on the ball for too long. And even if he did allow Harry Kane to get on the ball, there wasn't enough space for Kane to kind of dictate the game the way he did in that first game against Iran, And even if we look at someone like Harry Kane, a lot of talk about him. And one of the main things is that, one of the things that I've always kind of got a gripe with, just grinds my gears, is that does Harry Kane have to consistently play 90 minutes of every single game? Are there not times when we could potentially throw on a Callum Wilson, and we brought him here for a reason, bring him on. Maybe we try something different. Even if you keep Kane on the field, maybe bring on, a Harry Kane, Callum Wilson, should I say, sorry. Maybe you bring Wilson on to, act as the number 9 in the actual team, because Kane doesn't play like a number 9 at all. He plays like a 10, and sometimes even an 8. Heck, I've seen him in the 6, so he plays like that guy who's got a bit of a free role, can drop in when he needs to. And again, when it works, it's fantastic, not a problem. But the problem then is, if it's not working, we need to be able to try something different. And that's not what Gareth is doing. It was almost, I tweeted out and I was like, Klopp and Southgate, they're oh so similar, because, it's that kind of, we're just going to keep doing what we're doing. We're just going to keep doing it. And, we just pray that it's going to work. There's not going to be too much of a change. The substitutions that came on, Jordan Henderson coming onto the field of play, I'm still confused today. You know, we're a day later now, and I'm still confused as to what the real need in bringing someone like Jordan Henderson was. Even if you were trying to, you know, replace Jude Bellingham because you felt that maybe Bellingham, as I said, was chasing shadows, rightly so, take him off, not a problem. How about we bring on Phil Foden? The reason why I wanted to bring on Phil Foden, one, obviously, attacking player, probably the most gifted player that we do have in the squad, technical player, and all that. Um, but it's just more sometimes when you look at certain managers, they're very good at playing the mental game. They're very, and what I mean by that is sometimes in a game, things can change obviously quickly, especially with a substitution as well, and especially with a certain type of substitution. It's all in the mind. If you bring on someone like Jordan Henderson, you were saying, not sitting there thinking to themselves, oh crap, he's coming on the field of play. And then no disrespect to Jordan, but they're not thinking, oh crap, he's coming onto the field of play. So we need to just watch out for him because he's going to run in behind. And no, they're not thinking that. They're thinking, they're just trying to shore it up in the middle there. That's fine. We can just continue doing what we're doing. It was working before. If we do need to change it, bring on Aronson, bring on Gio Reyna, bring on other players to be able to just kind of help us out there, you know, just really with the energy. When you bring on someone like a Phil Foden, subconsciously, USA are then starting to think, oh, that's someone that we need to be wary of. So again, subconsciously, it's their shape will inevitably start to change in that game just because of Phil Foden and the way that he plays, and obviously in that position, you know, that he's going to play. You brought on Jack Grealish, again, no problem really with that. Felt like Sterling was just kind of just there. Didn't really offer you anything. It was one of those kind of, it was like a typical Chelsea performance that I've seen from him this season. No problem, you bring on Jack Grealish. But again, if you're going to bring on Grealish, I feel Grealish and Foden would work well. They've done it, you know, at Manchester City. So, you know, why can't they do that here, you know, for England? Why can't you get the two of them linking up in those half spaces? Get Jack Grealish off the line. Or if you do want to keep him out wide, have someone like a Foden in there who can play off of Harry Kane, but then also on that left-hand side next to Jack Grealish, you know, or on the right-hand side next to a Saka, but playing off of a Harry Kane. You know, if not, then you bring on Callum Wilson, who can play as the number 9 on the last shoulder, you know, and then you get Kane, who's got a kind of wealth of options, you know, to then be able to play the passes into and things like that. Declan Rice, you know, I was applauding him in that first game. Him and Bellingham, I was applauding both of them for their performances. But when you look at the performance last night, they just couldn't get any control. And Declan Rice looked like he was a little bit leggy in the middle of the park, which kind of surprised me. You know, I was thinking, as the game kind of wore on, you're looking a little bit leggy, son. And I was thinking, that shouldn't be right. You know, that doesn't really make too much sense to me. You know, I expect you to be able to continue marshalling that. But again, credit to the USA, credit to Tyler Adams, credit to Yunus Musa, credit to Weston McKennie. They just tired England out in the middle of the park. Mason Mount was just almost a headless chicken. You know, he's just running around, and it's like they don't really have a position for him. I've seen him on the left, I've seen him on the right, I've seen him in the central midfield, I've seen him as a false 9 at times. Like, there's no real position for him. So when you're trying to shoehorn him into a midfield 3, and in a game where it's not working, I was surprised that he was able to stay on the field. Even if you're going to bring on Jordan Henderson for Jude Bellingham, no problem. Maybe you didn't want to bring on Calvin. Cool, whatever. I can almost just forget about that. But then bring on someone else. You know, it's just, this is one of the reasons why people get so on to Gareth Southgate. Do you know what I mean? You can applaud him when he does, you know, certain things. And I've seen little bits and bobs of people saying, oh, but, you know, when Gareth did this, it worked. And when Gareth did that, it worked. And yes, you applaud them in those moments. But there's a difference between getting it right and being lucky and actually knowing what you're doing. Do you get what I'm trying to say? This is where the elite managers make their money, the Pep Guardiolas, the Jose Mourinhos, you know, the Carlo Ancelottis. This is where these guys make their money, because they're able to kind of, like I said, mentally and subconsciously, they're able to dictate what the opponent is going to do. They're not so worried about what you are going to do. Yes, of course, players on the pitch, if you've got, you know, fantastic players and stuff like that, you know, you're going to need to watch them. You're going to need to just make sure that if you do your job, those managers back themselves so much, like a Pep Guardiola or Jose, they back themselves so much with the tactics that they've set out that it will work if you just stick to what's been told. If you don't stick to what's been told, then it's not going to work inevitably, and then it almost looks a bit like a mess, to be honest with you. So I just feel like with Gareth, these are the kind of small little things that they're not massive. It's not like he made a massive mistake or anything as such, but in the game, when the game has come to a bit of a stalemate, so to speak, then this is where, like I said, you earn your bread and butter. This is where you look at, players like Trent. Which, listen, I've been one of the ones criticizing Trent this season. Trent is a player who, people call him generational, and Gary Neville mentioned that he'd be playing for Brazil, Spain, or whatever. Yeah, he probably would be potentially, depending on the games. I think they would choose him according to games, that they might need him, or at least bring him off the bench. That game was crying out for someone like him. Now, on the flip side of that, to be fair, in regards to that, people do need to also understand that this is a guy whose main attribute and probably only real attribute is going forward. This season has been poor going forward, very, very poor, like very poor. I don't think he's even got an assist, this season. So I can understand to a degree why you then wouldn't think, okay, well, why am I going to play him? It's not like, his main attribute, he's not doing that great. So what am I bringing him on for? It's not going to change much, to be honest with you. But in a game like yesterday, you just try different things. You just try different things. You need something different. You need a sort of different kind of option in them kind of games. If everything is all happening in the middle of the park and they're closing the passing lanes, maybe we need to then go out wide. But if going out wide isn't necessarily working with the players that you have, change the players that you have. I don't realistically mind taking off Saka for Marcus Rashford. Again, and this is why I'm not going to throw Southgate under the bus, so to speak, because some of the subs, I was like, I'm not going to bash you over them because the game's not working with what you currently have. So maybe, yeah, if you bring on someone else in that position, it may or may not work. But what I'm looking at is, okay, if you're bringing off a Saka for Marcus Rashford, I then probably would need for you to bring on a Trent, to be honest with you, because that gives Marcus Rashford someone to kind of play with on that right-hand side. Do you get what I mean? Because of his pace, then someone like a Trent Alexander-Arnold, who's very used to playing those balls over the top of the defense for Mo Salah with his pace, Marcus Rashford's got more than that. Marcus Rashford's got blistering pace. So use that to your advantage, because Kieran Trippier isn't really doing anything on that right-hand side. He was kind of getting caught out. One player I'll big up for England, probably the best player for England, was Harry Maguire. Someone that us as a nation have completely bashed, for the last 18 months. And not all the time is it right, but the majority of the time, yeah, it has been right. For Manchester United anyway. For England, there is no denying that this guy is a complete, and I do mean completely different player. He is not the same player for England as he is for Manchester United. I tweeted it out and I said it earlier. Maybe international style football suits him because of the pace of the game at times. It allows him to, someone who's quite a dominant individual anyway, as we saw with set pieces and stuff like that, and the USA set pieces, he was getting his head onto every single one of them. He was almost marshalling that, that defensive area. But when he goes for Manchester United, maybe because the game's just a little bit too intense for him, maybe it just doesn't really work, so to speak. I don't know. But for me, international football suits him. Hence the reason why I said maybe he probably would be best served if he moved to a different league. And you'd probably see the best of Harry Maguire at club level, because currently now Manchester United, it just doesn't really work, to be honest with you, especially with Ten Hag now in charge, and he seems like he's got his centre back pairing of Lisandro Martinez and Rafael Varane when they're both fit. I don't really see where Harry Maguire is going to fit into that. And in Premier League football, it's too fast paced. He just gets caught out all the time. So that's fine. Not every centre back is actually quick. We make out like all centre backs are rapidly quick and that they can beat everyone. Not everyone can do that. So some people will have need to play in a different way. And if you're not the main guy, which Harry Maguire isn't, then of course. And I feel like that's probably one of the things that Gareth Southgate also looks at. Hence the reason why he was playing with a 3 at the back prior to this tournament, because he probably felt I need to give Harry a bit more cover. But yeah, in regards to USA, for me, the game was won and was drawn in that middle of the park, to be honest with you. And as I said, if USA had someone who could finish, they would have been out of sight in that game completely. And they're definitely a team that, looking forward to the future, exciting. All they need is a number 9. If they get that with a Pulisic and Timothy on either side, there will be a massive problem, massive problem. Jerry mentioned on his show last night on the World Cup roundup. Make sure you guys check it out, by the way. He mentioned on the roundup about, was it Ream at the back there? Excellent. Absolutely excellent. Again, wasn't giving Harry Kane too much of a sniff. Yes, there were the odd occasions. There was the odd occasions that, like you would in any game, like, when you're not really playing well and you've been the second best, you're going to probably have those odd 1 or 2 chances because we've got, fantastic players in the attacking area. But I just felt like we wasn't utilizing them properly. And when it came time for the substitution, the subs just didn't make any sense. It's all great making these kind of subs and bringing on 4 players when you're winning 6-2 or 5-1 or whatever the case was at the time. Yeah, it looks great. Callum Wilson come on, the game's already kind of won and the shape of the other team's already kind of determined. But when you're now in this position whereby the game's really, really tight, this is your bread and butter. This is where you make your money. But again, I don't want to bash, Southgate too much because ultimately, the qualification is still in England's hands. Like I said, barring some miracle from Wales in the last game, then England will go through and it won't really be seen as a problem and we'll just brush this under the carpet. They'll go through to the round of 16, play whoever they play in that round, probably Ecuador potentially, who, again, Ecuador are a very, very good unit of a team that will prove to be a massive test for England. I don't see that being easy. Again, and they actually have a striker who can finish. So it's going to be very interesting if it is England versus Ecuador in that next round. It's actually going to be quite interesting to see how England fare against a team like Ecuador. Should have enough to do it, but if we're going by the evidence of last night against USA, it's going to be very, very tricky. It's going to be very, very tricky. But little bits from Gareth, I just felt he just needed to improve upon. Heading into this game against Wales, it's against Wales. I mean, I expected a victory against USA, but I certainly expect a victory, against Wales. Wales have been poor this campaign, and they're definitely the worst team in the group. No disrespect, but just the facts are the facts. So it's going to be quite interesting to see, how that kind of pans out because Wales seem to always want to turn up against England as well. So it will be interesting to see, how Gareth Southgate decides to kind of set up for a game like that. But we shall wait and see. But Yunus Musa. Just quickly, Yunus Musa, fantastic player. I absolutely love this midfield 3, man. Like I've been waxing lyrical about them, and I still wax lyrical about Declan Rice and Jude Bellingham. But I just think those two, unfortunately, they've got the English tax, so they're going to cost you an arm and a leg. When, if I'm being totally honest with you, Tyler Adams or Yunus Musa can probably offer you give or take the same thing and cost you about a fraction, of what those 2 other players are going to cost you. Unfortunately for them, it is just the way it is. We've heard the quotes about how much Jude Bellingham may or may not cost anybody who's looking to sign him, and I'm not saying he's a bad player because Jude Bellingham looks like he's going to turn into a fantastic player, but then so does Yunus Musa, so does Tyler Adams. Weston McKennie's a very decent player, and he's definitely someone who, is solid in this midfield here. And when I'm looking at the captain there for the United States, I'm sitting there thinking, there are a few teams who might need a number 6. Why not have a little look at him? Depending on what happens with Leeds this season, that's someone that I think quite a few teams are going to be looking at. Yunus Musa moved from Arsenal to Valencia, big move. Big move for himself, because he backed himself to be able to go to a different country, come out of his comfort zone, and be able to turn into the player that we saw, last night against England. So, these are the kind of players that I put him in my young guns to watch anyway for the World Cup, and that was for good reason. That wasn't just because this is a guy who's really, really good. He's gonna have spells and games where he might not be the best. But we saw USA against Wales, and they completely dominated that match. Just didn't have the clinical touch. We saw them again dominate against England, just didn't have that clinical touch. They're going to be facing off against Iran, where they're going to need to get a victory to be able to make it through. Anything less, and I think they are eliminated. So it's going to be quite interesting to see, what happens then there, with the USA. But, England, USA 0-0. Wasn't really too great, but we move England versus Wales on Tuesday, I believe. So yeah, stay tuned for my match preview for that, and then obviously I'll be dropping my post-match review straight after that. Make sure you guys like, make sure you guys subscribe. Please share this out. We're on the road to 150 subscribers. Hopefully we get that before the ending of the World Cup. I believe now we're on 107. So if my maths is correct, we've got 43 to go. 43 to go, and the tournament is only just really beginning. It's myself, G, and I am out.